Councillor, what's the biggest lesson you've learned this year?
Well, the biggest lesson I learned, Don, is that my job is really first to ask staff, next to cajole staff, and then finally to beg staff. And once you understand that, you can actually get things done at City Hall.
What's the biggest lesson you learned in your first year at City Hall?
This place functions different from the federal parliament. There's different rules and regulations here that I have to follow, and for me it was a steep learning curve, but I'm still coping and I'm still learning, and I'm finding out where the boys' rooms are.
So Councillor, here we are, a year into your council term. What's the biggest thing you learned this year?
Definitely different ways to work with people and how to come up with new ideas to be able to accomplish things for my residents.
So Councillor, this was your first year here at City Hall. What's the biggest thing you learned this year?
Oh, the biggest thing I learned this year is just how on many aspects in the city there's oftentimes nobody at the helm of control. We look at all of our capital projects across the city. How many examples do we have of a $50 million project going to a $100 million project? It's happening in my ward right now. When you ask the questions, who's in charge, everybody kind of looks around the room, and oftentimes there's nobody in charge. So there's structural issues that need to be resolved if we're going to move forward in the city, especially with a $20 billion deficit in infrastructure. If we're going to actually make the hard choices to raise $20 billion and spend it, we got to make sure that it's being spent properly and that the taxpayers' dollars are being respected in the process.
Councillor, you've been here a year now. What do you think the biggest thing you've learned this year?
It's amazing the difference on how things play out, what you see on paper, what you see on television, and what actually happens in the room. This council chamber is like a large crucible where you put a whole bunch of diverse people in, we duke it out, and we come up with what is good public policy, because everyone adds their piece. What's the most amazing part, though, is the human element to how things are done. Often it depends on the time of day, or what's happening in the room, or who's in the room, that influences how the debate occurs and what the ultimate outcome is of that. It's amazing how different things are first thing in the morning to late at night when people are human, they're fatigued, they're tired, and it's more difficult to understand what you see in front of you. And that just reminds you how important it is to stay sharp and to come prepared to these meetings.
So Councillor, you've been here a year now. What's the biggest thing you learned?
The biggest thing I learned is that councillors love to talk and talk and talk. Even when the debate has been already had, already flushed out, councillors love to stand up and speechify. That's the biggest thing I've learned.
What are you going to do about it in the new year?
I would love to tighten up the rules. Actually, you know, I think the biggest thing I've learned is that there's a lot of homework to do, and there's just a lot of reading to cover off. You can't possibly cover it off at all, so you've got to focus in on the major issues, or what you think are going to be the major issues, and then really do your homework and your due diligence by reading those reports and asking difficult questions.
So Councillor, you've been here a year now. What's the biggest thing you learned?
You know, I think the biggest thing I've learned this year is that at City Hall, whether it's on a local or a national issue, that there's a tremendous amount of impact we can have. I look at my own experience here for the year, and whether it's the very fine local granular issue like building a new YMCA and community center in my neighborhood in Kings Spadina, a growing neighborhood, or the national and international issue dealing with Syrian refugee resettlement, and as a city stepping forward to say we have a role to play as international residents, that at City Hall I've learned that we can make a difference every day in all different ways.